Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brenda Suggett, and I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian Association of Road Safety Professionals, or CARSP, and I am very ecstatic to be able to welcome you today to a webinar entitled The Urban School Transition and Fostering Safe Multimodal Relationships with Students. Today's webinar is part of a monthly webinar series that CARSP is currently doing for the Knowledge Exchange and Training Hub project, which is generously supported by Transport Canada. Before I introduce you to today's speaker, I wanted to go over a couple of housekeeping items with you. First of all, the questions will be left till the end of the presentation, and also to give us your questions, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen and not the chat function. However, you can chat with each other if you'd like, but I would be looking just at the Q&A area for your questions. And now to introduce today's speaker. Alicia Grucella is a professional engineer and mobility project manager at TY Lin International with over 5 years experience in transportation engineering, serving public and private sector clients across Canada. Through her consulting experience, Alicia has developed a focus in roadway safety, school zone planning, traffic operations, and active transportation that has allowed her to develop solutions that balance multimodal user needs holistically. She has contributed safety expertise on significant projects, including the City of Toronto's crosswalk review, the Waverley Transit Hub relocation plan in Thunder Bay, and the Lakeview Village Master Plan School Transportation Operations Review in Mississauga, all of which involved a significant focus on pedestrian and active safety to foster multimodal connections. Outside of work, Alicia also volunteers for the Engineer in Residence, or the EIR program, raising awareness and promoting STEM, that is science, technology, engineering, mathematics, in elementary schools. So it is my great pleasure to welcome you, Alicia.
Thank you so much, Brenda. Brenda, thank you for the introduction. So as we all know, the efficient and safe transportation of students to and from school is a challenge faced by school districts across the country. So today I will be talking about that and how the urban school transition can foster safe multimodal relationships with students. So as Brenda just introduced, here's just a little bit about me. As she said, I'm a transportation engineer and I've been working on a lot of different school projects and roadway safety projects. For this presentation, here's an agenda of the different topics I'll be running through. So to begin, I'll go over some transportation planning elements for school design. Then I will describe some of the differences between traditional and urban school transportation design. Then I will speak to promoting multimodal transportation in students and how we can do that, which can then lead towards creating a multimodal future. At the end, I'll do a quick summary, and as Brenda mentioned, we will have some time for a Q&A period. So please do feel free to write any questions you may have along the way, and we'll get to all the questions at the end. So to begin, I'll go over some school transportation design elements. These transportation design elements can be broken into two parts, site-related elements as well as street-related elements. So the site elements focus on the selection and design of the school site itself, including multimodal access and layout. The street elements focus on the surrounding streets and neighborhood around the school, focusing on traffic calming, street layouts, and transit integration. So now these are select elements that I'll be discussing for today's presentation. It's not a completely comprehensive list of all site and street transportation design elements. So the site elements that I'll be going over include a school bus area or loop, a vehicular pickup drop-off area or loop, as well as student parking area, visitor parking, and staff parking area. And then as well, I'll go over bike storage or bike parking on site. As for the street elements, I'll go over sidewalks, various pedestrian connections, speed control and traffic calming measures, transit, public transit, as well as bike lanes in the neighborhood. So as to begin, I'll go over the site elements. Just a precursor, I'll be going over just generally what the terms are, and I'll be distinguishing some of their differences. Then I will be discussing the elements that the element safety features and ways the different designs can promote active transportation. So to begin, bus area or bus loop. So school buses can pick up and drop off students a variety of different ways, depending on the school design. So there are curbside school bus pickup and drop-offs on on-street laybys. Then the pickup and drop-off can also occur on exclusive on-site school bus loops, which you can see in the image here. This is a dedicated school bus loop for pickup and drop-off. And then there are also shared on-site bus loops that can be shared with the car pickup and drop-off activities. So prioritizing a separated bus loop or a dedicated on-street lay-by for the buses does improve the safety for the students getting picked up and dropped off, as it reduces the conflict zones with cyclists or motorists. Next is the vehicular pickup drop-off area. So students can be picked up and dropped off either curbside with on-street laybys, as you can see in this image here, on site with a designated vehicular pickup drop-off loop, or as I mentioned in the previous slide, in an area shared either with school buses or with a staff and visitor parking lot. It's important to reduce the potential conflict zones between the pickup and drop-off area and the entrance to the school. A completely connected pedestrian pathway that leads directly from the pickup drop-off area to the school entrance is preferred, as again, it reduces the conflict zones. Also, a dedicated pickup drop-off area reduces the sporadic pickup drop-off activities with parents that can sometimes pull over anywhere on the street to drop their children off. Whereas a dedicated space kind of funnels the vehicles in an organized manner to reduce the conflict points. So next is the parking, whether it's student, visitor, or staff parking. Many schools do have municipal bylaw requirements that states the amount of parking spaces for employees and visitors that are required. However, when you provide too many on-site available free parking spaces, it creates an environment that does promote driving to school. You can see in the image here, it's a very traditional school design where there is an ample amount of parking spaces that probably aren't all required. And then another site element is bike parking. So providing bike parking is critical for promoting active transportation to schools. Unlike vehicular parking, bike parking, while it depends on the municipality, they often don't have bylaw required rates. So while some municipalities do provide recommended bike parking rates, bike parking usage should be continuously monitored, and if demand is reaching capacity, additional bike racks should be added in. This is critical so that students have the opportunity to be able to bike there and back without having to worry about where their bike's going to stay. So now I went over some of the on-site elements. I will now be going over the street and neighborhood elements. So some street elements, sidewalks, as I'm sure you all know, it channels pedestrian movement and access. While sidewalks can vary depending on the area, around a school, having wide sidewalks.
Alicia?
Yes.
Sorry to bother you. Can you lean closer to your laptop? We're not hearing you all that well.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Maybe I can put in my headphones.
Sure. Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks.
Sorry about that. Can everyone hear me a little bit better?
That's great.
Okay, great. Thanks. So just to now get back into the different street elements to start, I will be describing the sidewalk. So as many of you know, sidewalks are channels for pedestrian movement and access. Wide sidewalks to accommodate heavy pedestrian traffic during school peak times, as well as strollers and varied accessibility requirements, are critical, as when there is the school rush, there are high levels of pedestrian volume around the school access. Having a fully connected sidewalk network for students is very important for promoting walking to and from school. This leads into various pedestrian connections. So pedestrian connections, they can include crosswalks, PXOs, which are pedestrian crossovers, multi-use paths, as well as sidewalks. Having a pedestrian-friendly network surrounding the school for students and parents to be able to safely, comfortably, and efficiently walk to and from the school is critical for promoting active transportation. Another street element is speed control. So vehicular speeds can be controlled by traffic calming methods around the school area. School zones need physical traffic calming measures that can manage the traffic speeds and reinforce pedestrian friendly and safe speeds. Here you can see on the two images on the side, the top image shows a raised pedestrian crossing where it creates a physical traffic calming measure, as it's a barrier for the vehicles, but also it's the continuous sidewalk. It flips the road design, making the vehicle entering the vulnerable road user space instead of the other way around, where typically it's pedestrians that need to enter the road space to be able to cross the street. Similarly, on the bottom, it's another vertical traffic calming measure, a speed hump, where it physically requires the vehicle to slow down, creating safer speeds for the road. Another street element is public transit. So accessible, convenient public transit options should have transit stops as close to the school as possible to reduce the first mile, last mile obstacle. For those that may not be familiar, first mile, last mile refers to the common obstacle that prevents users from using transit, where the first mile is having to walk from their home, let's say, to the initial bus stop. And the last mile refers to getting off the bus and then walking to their final destination. Those two pieces often deter people from taking public transit since it's too far of a walk, or it adds too much time, or it is inconvenient in some way. So as I was saying, having the transit stop as close to the school entrance as possible is key to allowing people to be more, or to promote public transit. So public transit can be used by all school travelers, whether it's students, parents, or teachers, and is a sustainable option for those that live outside of the typical walking area. So next is I will go over bike lanes. So dedicated bike lanes can be provided on street, separated on street, or with off-street paths. You can see here in the image on the side a variety of different types of bike lanes. These often get decided at the municipality level, or as well in the local context, depending on what design is best suited for the area. As students are one of the most vulnerable road users on the road, that is generally because they are the most inexperienced on the road. So it's very important to promote biking to school with a high standard for connectivity, comfort, and safety. As you can see, I have the scale between less comfortable and more comfortable for the bike user. So in a school area, it's very important to stay near the more comfortable end of the spectrum. When we have the absence of separated bike lanes, it does tend to create an atmosphere where children will either bike on the sidewalk, perhaps, because they're not feeling comfortable to bike on the road where there are also cars traveling past. So providing a fulsome connected bike lane network with connections between students' homes and the school will create a safer network for students to travel. Okay, so now we have had a quick overview of the different transportation school design elements, whether it's on site or in the neighborhood. So next I will go over the differences between a traditional and an urban school design. So for a traditional school, while dense urban areas have shifted to an urban school design, the traditional school design is still largely used in rural and suburban areas. Generally, traditional schools have a main entrance with a direct vehicular route to the front entrance and a parking area immediately next to the entrance. Also, typically traditional schools will only have 1 or 2 stories, and they'll be quite sprawling over the land. Often there is a separate designated bus loop, a separate pickup drop-off loop, separated as well, a student parking area, staff parking area, as well as a visitor parking area. You can see in the image here, there is a school, it takes up a lot of land, and you can see a lot of the land is covered with, whether it's on surface parking or bus and pickup drop-off loops. Most students do tend to arrive by bus, parent drop-off, or student drivers, depending on the age of the school, of the students at the school. And there is minimal pedestrian or walking traffic. Now, to flip it, this is a typical urban school design. So urban sites are often located within a specific city block with the exterior of the building located directly adjacent to the sidewalk. There are limited play fields or athletic courts located outside of the building. And due to minimal student area near the entrances, often additional entrances are required, and a staggered start and end time to accommodate the high student traffic is also required. Generally, urban schools have multi-stories. You can see the difference in the size of land required between the urban site and the image here compared to the image before of the traditional school. With urban schools, most students do live within walking communities where minimal students are being bused and there is little or no parking provided. The entrance door may be directly accessed from the exterior public sidewalk. And as there is often minimal parking, there may be also a underground parking area where the staff and visitors will be able to park. But again, there is often minimal visitor or student parking available. The pickup drop-off activity often occurs with on-street lay-bys or a small pickup drop-off loop that is generally combined with either the bus loop or as well the public parking or the staff parking lot. So now that we have an understanding of some of the differences between a traditional school design and an urban school design, I'm going to just list out some of the pros and cons. So some of the benefits with an urban school design, one of the largest benefits is that it promotes active transportation. They are generally situated within reasonable walking distance for many students, and they're in a fine grid neighborhood, so it is highly connected. Also, a urban school design generally does not have the capacity for high peak hour traffic, since it's located on a more local road with perhaps only one lane in each direction. So it doesn't have as high capacity as some schools in rural or suburban context. But the good thing is that the active transportation does mitigate this demand. Another aspect of urban school design is that it does limit the amount of parking supply. So if you did have to drive, there might not be as much parking available for you. Often the space is constrained and it requires additional entrances or staggered start and end times, as I had previously mentioned, to accommodate the high pedestrian traffic as the students end their day or begin their day. Whereas the traditional school design, it does generally promote a car-centric travel. They are often located in car-focused neighborhoods and with limited active transportation facilities. One of the benefits with a traditional school design is that it does provide separated spaces for the different pickup drop-off activities, which is a safety element, as long as they have the proper pedestrian links to the school entrance. Another item is that it does often provide a surplus of parking, which again directly relates to the promotion of the car-centric travel. So now that we went over some of the benefits and differences between an urban school design and a traditional school design, I do want to say that the built environment does have a large impact on the travel options of residents and students. So here I'll go over the differences between an urban, suburban, and rural neighborhood, and the various considerations and context. So the urban school design has recently been incorporated into many city centers and urban neighborhoods. While the suburban neighborhoods generally follow traditional school designs, there is an opportunity to incorporate many of the urban school transportation planning elements into their school designs to be able to promote active mobility to target many students of which live in that walkable catchment area of the school. Schools in rural areas may need to be more car focused due to locational barriers, but the school designs can again take from the urban school transportation planning elements to be able to promote more active transportation for those that do live close by, but particularly increase a focus on their school bus routes for the students. No matter the school's environment, it's important to encourage active transportation and transit where possible. So now that we have an idea between the differences of urban and traditional schools, I'm going to go into promoting how we can promote multimodal transportation in students. So first, how can we attract students to multimodal transportation? Now, this does kind of depend on the student's age group. So I've divided it up. First, I'll begin particularly with elementary schools. For elementary school children, providing the neighborhood measures previously stated, including active transportation safety, connectivity, and traffic calming measures, is key to promoting active transportation. Additionally, promoting school buses for those that live outside of the walkable area will create the habit of commuting in students. These habits of walking, biking, and taking the bus to school will directly translate from elementary schools into their secondary school. Now I will speak to secondary schools. So students in secondary schools do have more freedom as they are generally a little bit older and are more likely to be able to use public transit to and from school. It's critical to ensure the local transit system is convenient for students. It's shown that young people do have a special focus on convenience, predictability, cost, as well as positive impact on their community when they're considering transit. Including stops at the school entrance, as well as at points of attraction, whether it's movie theaters, popular workplaces for them after school, shopping centers, community centers. It is key to attracting youth towards transit. This, again, directly relates to the first mile, last mile obstacle I previously mentioned. Also, many students use transit in parallel with biking. So adding convenient active transportation linkages to the transit system and ensuring bike racks are on all buses will make the transit system accessible for those students that do also bike. Particularly with secondary school, as I mentioned, that they do have a special focus on convenience, predictability, and cost. It is great when the municipality is able to provide a student fare price. That way it'll pro. And now I will focus more on the public transit system and how that can attract students to multimodal transportation. So by modernizing the transit system with new technology to make the system predictable and reliable will have a great impact on promoting multimodal transportation in students. This can be done perhaps by having an app that enhances the customer's experience to help the younger generation, as many youths do run between many destinations, and they want that affordable, convenient option to get them, whether it's from school to home or to work or to meeting their friends, what have you. The app capabilities can include route planning, current bus locations, as well as automatic payment options. Now, last but not least, is ensuring proper safety on the transit system. Children often avoid transit due to their parents' concerns on safety. So ensuring and promoting a safe transit system will ease the parents' minds, and that way the families can also promote transit as a travel option to their children. And now that we have those tools in place, the last element is raising awareness. So in school, after providing the appropriate infrastructure, it's very important to promote active transportation through various programs and incentives. This can be done through a variety of ways depending on the target age group. You can see in the image I have shown here, this is a walking school bus program that some elementary schools have taken, and it has gained a lot of traction over the past years. But other schools are also recently creating not only a walking to school group, but also a biking to school group. That way there is more safety in numbers. So running a public campaign targeting a younger audience can increase student public transit ridership as well. Through an incorporated discount agreement with a rideshare service can also assist with that first mile, last mile barrier. Also, we could create a partnership between the local schools and the transit operator to create a better experience or a subsidized rate for the students. Further, the transit agency could partner with classrooms to provide free transit for field trips, which then leads them to getting used to taking the transit system and again promotes transit in their future. Lastly is providing interactive entertainment or, for example, Wi-Fi at the certain bus terminals and bus stops. This can keep the children engaged and interested while they are waiting for their transit. And this makes the waiting period much more enjoyable, which then leads to them wanting to take the transit again. So now that we know the tools on how to create or promote active transportation in students, how can this lead us towards a more multimodal future? So first, why is a multimodal future important? So travelers now, I do feel like this is a bit intuitive for some, but I do think it's also important to state, but travelers do often prefer using alternative modes since walking and biking can be more enjoyable as well as provide healthy exercise. Whereas with public transit, commuting does impose less stress and allows commuters to read, work, or rest as they travel to their destination. Society in general would benefit from a more efficient road with additional available parking, improved fuel consumption, improved insurance pricing, and more efficient management of their road space. This relatedly will also reduce traffic congestion, parking costs, related collisions, as well as pollution emissions. From promoting health and fitness to reducing traffic congestion and environmental impact, Multimodal transportation is vital to community well-being and sustainability. So now that we agree that it's important to create a multimodal future, this is how we can create it. This is done mainly by providing the dedicated infrastructure required for all modes of travel, whether it's walking, biking, school bus, or transit. We can address the barriers to access and improve convenience and awareness for multimodal travel. We can build safe, efficient, and attractive transportation networks for users of all ages and physical abilities, and promote multimodal transportation starting at a young age to create the habits so that they keep it up as they grow. So now I'll be going into conclusions and a short summary, and then we will get into the question and answer session. So in conclusion, the best way to foster multimodal habits is from an early age. We can design and operate school sites with active transportation as a focus to promote multimodal travel in all ages. We can create a safe and connected neighborhood that surrounds the school to promote walking and biking for both students, parents, as well as teachers. By pulling transportation design elements from the urban school design into the suburban and rural communities, we can promote multimodal transportation. Providing ample school buses and routes leads to additional utilization of the school buses, which then leads to students using public transit in secondary schools. Once the multimodal travel habits are formed, the community can thrive with less vehicles on the road, less congestion, fewer resulting collisions, and a healthier, safer community. So thank you very much for listening. Now we can get into the question and answer period.
Okay, thank you so much, Alicia. That was a very excellent overview of the design elements to encourage multimodal transportation, and also within that active transportation. And I think that was great overview.
Thank you.
Also, I forgot to mention earlier that our technical organizer for today is Navoda Ralagadaj, and she's helping me with the questions since she's a PhD student in engineering. So and I'm not an engineer, so some of the questions will be coming from her. But first of all, I'll turn it over to our audience and I will look at what their questions are. Okay, so the first one is from Paul Mackey. He says, are you aware of any geometric design guidelines that specifically address special needs around schools and take into account child development psychology?
Oh, thank you. That's a great question. I do know there are geometric design guidelines for school design, school access. They are generally divided by region or municipality, and they do differ. But I don't know of any that actually relates it to child psychology. I believe you said child psychology. So that's quite interesting. As well as there are a lot of AODA accessibility requirements that are transferable with school design. So I'd say definitely related to accessibility, there are design guidelines, but as how it relates to the child psychology and development, I myself am not aware of any, but that would be interesting to see.
Okay, thank you, Alicia. And I have another question from Amar Ladd, and he says, great presentation. Thank you for the insights. In practice, have you faced resistance from municipalities when recommending changes to school designs away from the agency standards? And if so, what would you suggest is the best approach? It's a good one.
Thank you. Another great question. I think a lot of people in the consulting engineering practice, when building new schools, especially when you're trying to get away from the typical traditional standards, there is some pushback. But what I found to be helpful and can work is when you really support your argument and you show all the benefits to the different design changes that you're implementing. You can show examples of where it has previously been implemented and successful, as well as last but not least, most importantly, showing that safety will not be impacted by your changes. And if anything, showing that safety can be improved by your changes, that can really go a long way.
Okay, perfect. And I have a question from Navoda. She said, are you aware of any work evaluating the efficacy of speed limits in school zones? And do you think the school zone speed limits are efficient?
Thanks. So that is actually a bit of a hot topic right now. There's a program that's really picked up speed. It's called Vision Zero. And with Vision Zero, they have created a lot of different school community or school safety zone measures. And they've really come down on school speed limits, whether it's adding in a lot of additional traffic calming measures, adding in automated speed enforcement cameras, and adding in a lot of different elements to reduce the speeds around the school. The speed around the school does, again, depend where geographically you're located. I know for myself, I'm in Toronto, and I believe they've recently brought the speeds to 30 kilometers an hour, which research has shown 30 kilometers an hour is sufficient to be able to decrease the percentage of fatality when in a collision. So I know in Toronto, they've done the research about that, and that is a program they have somewhat recently been incorporating because of that.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And I had a question. You talked about how suburban and rural school designs are very car-centric, and that when possible, you should bring in some of the urban design elements. And I just wondered if you had any suggestions on what elements might be the easiest to win people over on, and you know, considering maybe cost might be a factor, and as someone said earlier, the agency guidelines and so forth. Are there any specific elements that you think would be easier to win them over with?
Absolutely. Thanks, Brenda. So there are differences to that answer, whether it's an existing school or a new school being built. With an existing school, with the neighborhood's infrastructure already in place, it does make it a bit more challenging to add more measures in. That's where perhaps you can look into traffic calming measures, creating bike lanes, and creating additional crosswalks for the pedestrians to create additional connectivity in the neighborhood. But I think you have a lot more freedom when it is a new school being built, as you can really add to the on-site transportation design elements, making sure that you're reducing the amount of parking you're providing, reducing the dedicated pickup drop-off areas, and promoting active transportation from the beginning in the students and parents, so that the the habits are already being created once the school opens. Similarly, it would depend on whether the neighborhood around the school is also being recently developed. Then you can build a more complete streets design and pedestrian focused network around the school and in the community. Whereas if the neighborhood's already been built, and then again, you'd have to see what else can be added into the existing network, whether it's additional crosswalk supervision, on-street bike lanes, whatever physically you're able to do depending on the existing barriers.
Okay, that's excellent. Another question, this is also from Navoda. She was wondering how challenging it is practically to promote sustainable and active transportation in an urban context. In other words, to promote a complete streets design in an already established environment.
So the benefits of having a school in an urban school or in an urban area is that a lot of the students do live close by and they will walk. And that is a habit generally that is passed down as well from the parents' habits, as in an urban school context, they really, my opinion is many parents might not want that major traffic congestion when they're going to drive their students, their kids to school, and on a smaller, tighter road network, it does make it a bit more challenging for the parents as well. So I think in an urban context, there are a lot more students that do walk to and from school. So that's kind of already formed in the students' habits.
Now, this is a question that hits close to home. At my children's high school, there seemed to be not a lot of acceptance or pickup in terms of cycling. A lot of them, what you were describing earlier as a traditional model, really fit it quite well in terms of a lot of the students drove themselves or they were dropped off by parents. There was definitely a portion of them would take the transit. And just getting back to with respect to cycling and that, a lot of them saw it as being kind of uncool to cycle. And so I'm just wondering, sometimes you have the attitudes or the perceptions, what their peers think amongst particularly at the high school age, where they are very focused on what their peers think. And I don't know, this might be more of a public health kind of, but how do you help to change that mindset? And I know you talked earlier about parents trying to instill, those kind of values of, but I think once you hit the peer group age, they start to take on their friends. I don't know if you have any suggestions in that area.
Yeah, I know that can definitely be a challenge. I remember back when I went to high school, a lot of the cooler kids did actually bike because biking was in at that time. But I know depending where you live, when you're in that school, it does really vary. But that's again when I would lean towards the different programs and incentives towards active transportation. When the school can promote and try to make it cool to bike to school, that would really be the way to go. And maybe not in a high school, but in a younger generation, creating the group bike programs where it's like a bike school bus of sorts, where all the kids go from home to home and pick up their friend, and then they all bike as a group together to school. If you create that habit in elementary school, then in high school it would be cool because you're getting picked up and you're going to school with all your friends. So I'd say right now it's a harder habit to tackle, but if you create these habits younger, then it would create better habits in the future.
Very good. That's good answer. And I just have one last question between Navoda and myself, and it's from Navoda, and she is, with her focus on weather and its impact on traffic safety, she's wondering if there's any guidelines out there that have been established in terms of, I guess, changes in how people use multimodal transportation when you've got adverse weather. Like obviously you possibly can't bike in or walk, and just whether, is that something that some schools have actually actively done, is created some guidelines or messaging around what to do, especially if it is very focused on active transportation?
Navoda, great question. And I know you had previously mentioned you're in Calgary right now, so I understand that would be a huge barrier for folks when it is cold and snowy outside, depending on the municipality you live in. Sometimes the bike lanes don't actually get their snow cleared as well. In which case it does make it impossible for you to be able to bike to school. There are some dedicated bicyclists out there that do bike all year round, even in the snow, as long as the snow has been cleared from their path. So that's when I would lean towards the municipalities to really try to clear the snow off all the bike paths, creating a feasible way for them to do it. But I think it's something that should definitely get looked into more, is how active transportation can be promoted in the winter.
Okay, we've got some more questions coming in. Brian Jonah has asked, have there been any studies which have compared the new active transportation school design with the urban design with the traditional design in terms of more kids walking or taking transit, as well as reduced collisions around the school?
I know a couple projects I've worked on, we've actually gone on site and at different urban schools, and we've done surveys on how many students there get picked up and dropped off versus other modes. And we compared that to a more traditional school where we've done a survey, and it is true that, at least based off the few surveys we've done, that in traditional schools there are more vehicles coming and going during the peak hours compared to when there is that urban school design with the active transportation elements. We didn't count all the students, but we had the total amount of students at both schools, and then we had the amount of vehicles that came and went. So we were able to come up with an estimate. But that is just a small sample that we did. I don't know of any large scale studies that have really been looking into this. As far as I understand, the urban school design is still picking up traction in a lot of places. It is a little bit newer. The traditional school design is kind of very much more used in the industry when they're building a school. So I think it's something that could be looked into more.
Great. And the last question, I think you've already answered it. It was something that Navoda had asked. Aftab Body asked, well, first of all, they said, great presentation. Did you ever consider weather impact on multimodal? Like in winter, kids may not walk and be dropped off by vehicles, which leads to an increase, and hence they'd be dropped off by vehicles and increases in traffic volumes. So touched on that one. Did you have anything else to add, or?
Well, I do think that generally when folks are designing schools, they do look at worst case conditions. So they would be looking at the winter, and they would still be providing the appropriate pickup drop-off laybys, let's say, or surrounding street parking if it is urban, or they'll still have perhaps the underground parking lot, some places may, and that can mitigate and provide some capacity, but hopefully students can, the students that live very close can still walk to school even if it is winter, and those further away can take advantage of the available pickup drop-off spaces that are there.
Great. And one other question. I know that perceived safety is a big factor with respect to parents, and I guess they would relay that to then their children, whether they feel comfortable with them walking to school or biking. If changes have been made to make it safer, and yet perceptions are still that it's not safe, I'm just wondering if that's a factor that you ever measure or look at or try and change in any way. I'm just curious if the whole area of perceived safety is something that you look at.
Absolutely. I think it's something that should be looked at. It's not something I've ever really researched or looked into, but I think it's clear that students and their parents' perceived safety of whether it's the public transit system or their local neighborhood, whether the students are going to and from after work, where in some places it may already be getting dark. I think that's a huge factor, and that's why providing the appropriate safety measures to improve the actual safety, which can then improve the perceived safety, is important.
Okay, perfect. And I think we just have time for one more question. And this is from an anonymous attendee. Are there any guidelines available for schools with a wider catchment area, that is, a school servicing urban and rural populations?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I think, I don't know if there are any particular guidelines for that, but I do think it would be encompassed in the municipal or regional guidelines for the school. I know there are, what I was going over is kind of a generality of different urban and traditional schools and areas, but this does really depend. For example, I know in Ontario, certain French schools, their catchment area is so much larger, and it does make people have to commute from further away. But that's when you can really look towards improving the school bus system so that they can still commute by school bus instead of having their parents drive and everyone having to come in by an individual car.
Excellent. Well, that brings us to the end of our webinar, and I would like to thank Alicia for the excellent presentation and the very well thought through and presented answers to our questions. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Brenda.
Yeah, you're very welcome. And I also just wanted to make the participants aware of the next webinar, which is currently available for signing up, for registering. It's on the ethics of connected and automated vehicles, and it's going to take place on January 18th. So sign up quickly. There are limited spots, and we have a professor from the UK who's going to be presenting, who actually served as a member of an ethics committee that was looking at that whole issue in the UK. So anyway, and I just want to thank everybody for participating and wish you all happy holidays.
Thanks
Take
so
care,
much.
everybody.